I still remember the day I first met my neighbor, Alex. It was about 3 months after I moved into the Oakwood apartments on the east side of town. We'd exchanged polite nods in the hallway, but never really spoken beyond a quick hello or nice weather we're having. You know how it is with apartment neighbors, that strange limbo between being complete strangers and being acquaintances. Alex lived in apartment 4B, just across the hall from my 4A. From what I could gather, he was in his early 30s, worked some corporate job that required button-down shirts, and seemed to be the quintessential straight guy, always talking about sports with other neighbors, and once I overheard him discussing a date he'd been on with some woman named Jessica. But the real star of apartment 4B wasn't Alex. It was his dog, a golden retriever named Baxter. Baxter was the kind of dog that made everyone smile. He had this perpetually happy face, with a tongue that seemed too big for his mouth, always hanging out to one side. His fur was that perfect golden color that seemed to capture sunlight and hold it, making him look like he was glowing even on cloudy days. Unlike his somewhat reserved owner, Baxter never met a stranger. He would wag his entire body, not just his tail, whenever he saw anyone in the hallway. I'd often hear his excited paws clicking on the hardwood floors of the hallway before I'd even open my door to leave for work. I've always been a dog person, so naturally, Baxter and I became fast friends. I'd keep treats in my pocket just for our hallway encounters, which Alex seemed amused by, but never objected to. "You're making him like you more than me," he'd joke sometimes, in those brief interactions that never quite evolved into actual conversations. There was something about Alex that made me a bit nervous, not in a bad way, but in that way that makes your words get tangled and your thoughts scatter. So our relationship remained firmly in the category of hallway acquaintances, connected primarily through his golden ball of enthusiasm. That all changed on a rainy Saturday afternoon in April. I was sitting on my couch, reading a book and enjoying the sound of rain against my windows, when I heard a commotion in the hallway. There was the familiar sound of Baxter's paws, but they seemed more frantic than usual, accompanied by Alex's voice calling after him. Before I could even process what was happening, my door, which I'd left slightly ajar to let in the fresh post-rain breeze, burst open, and in bounded Baxter, soaking wet and trailing muddy paw prints across my clean floor. Let me paint the picture for you. There was Baxter, dripping water everywhere, looking absolutely delighted with himself as he pranced around my living room like he owned the place. His fur was darkened by the rain, making him look like he'd been dipped in honey rather than his usual sunshine gold. He had that wild, excited energy dogs get after being in the rain, where they seemed to be operating at twice their normal speed. And there I was, book forgotten in my lap, watching in amused shock as this soaking wet canine tornado spun through my carefully organized living room. I should explain that my apartment was my sanctuary, meticulously decorated with vintage finds and carefully curated furniture that reflected my personality. I'm not obsessively neat, but I do like things in their place. And here was Baxter, shaking rainwater all over my cream-colored sofa and vintage rug, looking at me with those big brown eyes that seemed to say, "Isn't this the most fun you've ever had?" Just as I was about to get up and try to contain the chaos, Alex appeared in my doorway, looking as wet as his dog. His normally perfectly styled dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his white t-shirt clung to his chest in a way that was, well, let's just say it was distracting. He was slightly out of breath, clearly having chased Baxter down the hallway. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the absurdity of the situation hanging between us. Then, to my complete surprise, instead of apologizing and immediately retrieving his dog, Alex stepped fully into my apartment, closed the door behind him, and smiled. It wasn't the polite, neighbor-to-neighbor smile I was used to seeing in the hallway. This was different, warmer, more genuine, with a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. "Looks like Baxter decided it was time for us to finally have a proper introduction," he said, his voice carrying a warmth I hadn't noticed before. I remember thinking how strange it was to have him in my space. For months, Alex had existed only in the hallway, a figure I saw in passing. Now here he was, standing in my living room, rain dripping from his clothes onto my hardwood floors, and somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "He's got good timing," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart did something complicated in my chest. Though his manners could use some work. Baxter, meanwhile, had completed his initial exploration of my living room and had settled on my rug, rolling around as if trying to dry himself off. Or more likely, trying to transfer as much of the rain and mud from his fur to my rug as possible. Alex laughed at the sight, a genuine, unguarded sound that I'd never heard from him before. "Baxter, you're being a terrible guest," he said, though his tone was full of affection. "Let me explain why this moment matters so much in the story. Up until this point, Alex and I had existed in parallel, living across from each other but never really intersecting. Baxter's impromptu visit had suddenly created an overlap, forcing us out of the comfortable distance of hallway pleasantries. There's something uniquely intimate about being in someone's home for the first time. You see how they live, the colors they choose, the books on their shelves, the way they arrange their space. It's like getting a glimpse into their mind. Alex looked around my apartment, taking in the details, the collection of vintage cameras on my bookshelf, the abstract paintings on the walls, the plants crowding my windowsills. "Nice place," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "It suits you." There was something in the way he said it that caught me off guard, as if he'd been forming an impression of me over these months, just as I had of him. "Thanks," I replied, suddenly very aware of how my space might look through his eyes. "I'd give you the tour, but it seems Baxter's already taking care of that." As if on cue, Baxter had gotten up and moved to my kitchen, his nails clicking on the tile as he investigated this new territory. Alex moved to follow him, then stopped, seeming to realize he was still dripping water everywhere. "I should probably." He gestured vaguely at himself, and I quickly grabbed a towel from the bathroom, handing it to him with what I hoped was a casual smile. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I felt that ridiculous flutter in my stomach that I thought I'd outgrown after high school. While Alex dried himself off as best he could, I found another towel and approached Baxter, who was now sniffing enthusiastically at my refrigerator. "Come here, buddy," I said, kneeling down. Baxter immediately abandoned his investigation and bounded over to me, nearly knocking me over in his enthusiasm. I laughed as I tried to towel him down, which was like trying to dry off a perpetual motion machine. He kept wiggling and trying to lick my face, clearly thinking this was a fantastic new game. Alex watched us with that same warm smile. "He really likes you," he observed, coming over to help contain his energetic pet. "He's a good judge of character, you know." There was something in his voice, a note of sincerity that cut through the casual remark, making it feel like more than just a throwaway comment about his dog. As we both knelt there on my kitchen floor, trying to dry off the wriggling, happy dog between us, something shifted. The awkwardness that had always lingered in our hallway interactions was gone, replaced by a comfortable camaraderie born from the shared absurdity of the situation. We were laughing, our hands occasionally brushing as we worked on the impossible task of drying an enthusiastic golden retriever who thought it was all a game. "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly," Alex said as we finally gave up on getting Baxter completely dry. "I'm Alex Thompson." He held out his hand formally, as if we were meeting at a business conference rather than kneeling on my kitchen floor with a damp dog between us. I couldn't help but laugh at the formality, but I took his hand anyway. "I know who you are, Alex. We've been neighbors for 3 months. I'm Jamie Carson." His hand was warm and solid around mine, and he held on just a moment longer than strictly necessary for a handshake. "I know," he replied with a smile that created a dimple in his left cheek I'd never noticed before. "But now we're properly introduced." There was something about the way he said it, like this moment marked a new beginning, a shift from being people who lived across from each other to people who knew each other. Baxter, apparently bored with our human formalities, wandered back into the living room and promptly jumped onto my couch, making himself comfortable as if he'd done it 100 times before. Alex winced. "Baxter, get down from there." But the damage was already done. My couch now had a large, damp dog-shaped imprint on it. I waved away Alex's concerns. "It's fine. The couch has seen worse." This wasn't entirely true. The couch was relatively new and had mostly seen me eating takeout and watching Netflix. But something made me want to ease his embarrassment. "At least let me make it up to you," Alex insisted, running a hand through his damp hair, which was starting to dry in unruly waves. "Maybe dinner? I make a pretty decent pasta carbonara." The offer hung in the air between us, and I suddenly realized this might be more than just a neighborly apology. Here's where I should probably explain something about myself. I'd had my fair share of crushes on straight guys before. It's practically a rite of passage for gay men. And I'd learned, sometimes painfully, that reading too much into friendly gestures was a one-way ticket to disappointment. So I trained myself to keep those feelings in check, to assume platonic intent unless explicitly told otherwise. But something about the way Alex was looking at me made those carefully constructed walls waver. "Dinner sounds great," I heard myself say, trying to keep my tone casual. Though after seeing the chaos one wet dog can create, I'm a little worried about what might happen in a kitchen. Alex laughed, that same unguarded sound that seemed to fill the room. "Fair point. Maybe we start with takeout, then? There's that new Thai place on Main Street everyone's been talking about." And just like that, we were making plans. Standing in my kitchen, with Baxter now snoring softly on my couch, we exchanged phone numbers and settled on dinner the following evening. The whole interaction had a dreamlike quality to it. This man who had been a peripheral figure in my life for months was suddenly at the center of it, making plans and smiling at me in a way that made my stomach do gymnastics. When Alex finally collected his dog and prepared to leave, there was a moment at my door that felt charged with possibility. He paused, Baxter's leash in hand, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm glad Baxter decided to crash your quiet afternoon," he said softly. "Me too," I replied, meaning it more than I could express. "He's welcome anytime. You both are." The words came out before I could consider their implications, but Alex's smile and response was worth any potential awkwardness. After they left, I stood in my apartment, taking in the muddy paw prints on the floor, the damp spot on the couch, the lingering scent of rain and dog that now mingled with the usual smells of my home. My quiet, orderly Saturday had been completely derailed, and I couldn't have been happier about it. The next day, our dinner plans materialized into one of the most enjoyable evenings I'd had in a long time. We ordered from the Thai place, and Alex brought it over to my apartment, along with Baxter, who was considerably drier this time, and a bottle of wine. We talked for hours, discovering all the things we couldn't learn from brief hallway encounters. He was an architectural engineer who loved classic films and had a secret passion for baking bread. I worked in graphic design, collected vintage cameras that actually worked, and had once spent a summer hiking the Appalachian Trail. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Baxter's occasional demands for attention or treats. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly confused about Alex's intentions. There were moments when he would hold my gaze a beat too long, or when his hand would casually brush against mine as we reached for the wine bottle. That made me wonder if I was misreading the situation entirely. "Can I ask you something?" I finally said, after we'd moved from the dining table to the couch, the remains of our dinner cleared away and the wine bottle significantly emptier. "Anything," Alex replied, turning to face me fully. Baxter had settled between us on the couch, his head resting on Alex's lap, while his tail occasionally thumped against my leg. "I thought you were straight." The words came out more bluntly than I'd intended, and I immediately wished I could rephrase them. But Alex didn't seem offended or taken aback. Instead, he smiled that dimpled smile that was quickly becoming my favorite sight. "I never said I was," he replied simply, "though I can see why you might have thought so." "The sports talk with Mr. Jenkins from 2C? The date with Jessica?" I countered, referencing the bits and pieces I'd gathered from our months as hallway acquaintances. Alex laughed. "I like sports. And Jessica is my sister. I was telling Mr. Jenkins about having to be her +1 at a work event because her boyfriend bailed last minute." He tilted his head, studying me with an amused expression. "You've been paying attention." I felt my cheeks warm. "Just being observant," I mumbled, suddenly very interested in petting Baxter, who responded with appreciative tail thumps. "If we're being honest," Alex continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I've been wanting to talk to you properly since you moved in. But you always seemed in a hurry, or I'd lose my nerve." He shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both vulnerability and confidence. Then yesterday, Baxter took matters into his own paws. I looked up from the dog to find Alex watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I'm glad he did," I said quietly. "Me too," Alex replied, echoing my words from the day before. Then, with a deliberateness that left no room for misinterpretation, he leaned across Baxter and kissed me. It was brief and gentle, a question more than a declaration. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine, waiting for an answer. In response, I leaned in and kissed him back, providing the answer we both wanted. Baxter, apparently displeased with being squished between us, gave an indignant huff and jumped off the couch, settling on the floor with what seemed like a canine eye roll at human antics. That was 6 months ago. Today, Baxter regularly divides his time between apartments 4A and 4B, though lately, he's had to adjust to us spending more time in the same place rather than across the hall from each other. Alex still loves sports, and I still collect vintage cameras. We still laugh about that rainy day when a golden retriever decided we'd been neighbors long enough, and it was time to be something more. Sometimes the most significant moments in our lives arrive unexpectedly, carried in on muddy paws, accompanied by rain-soaked smiles and closed doors that open up whole new worlds of possibility. I've learned that the line between stranger and friend, between neighbor and lover, can be crossed in an instant, often when we least expect it. And sometimes, it takes a dog with poor boundaries but excellent instincts to show us the way. As for Baxter, he seems pretty pleased with himself for his matchmaking success. He still bounds into my apartment like he owns the place, but now his human follows without hesitation, closing the door behind him with that same smile that changed everything. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Total _char_count, 13,754.